Good afternoon. I'm Yaakov Shapiro, and the topic of today's discussion is how to fight Zionism. If you have a friend who's a Zionist, I'm going to do my best to make suggestions on how to convince him to abandon his Zionist ideas. If you are influenced by Zionism, and many people who don't realize they are, really are, how to recognize that influence and how to rid yourself of it. The reason why you would want to rid yourself of Zionist influence is because Zionism is an ideology that is a liability to anybody that is influenced by it. It serves no purpose. It thought it would serve a purpose, but it doesn't. It doesn't benefit anybody, and it's only a liability to anybody that has it. But in order to do this, obviously, first we have to define Zionism. There are many, if you ask a Zionist what Zionism is, well, they'll give you all sorts of definitions. Mostly it'll be obfuscation. A Zionist will tell you that Zionism is just the right of the Jewish people for self-determination in their homeland. Other Zionists will tell you, and if you look it up, they'll give you these various definitions of Zionism, that Zionism is uh, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, or Zionism is the movement to create and maintain a Jewish homeland or a Jewish state or a nation or Jewish nation state. The problem is that the Zionists rely on the ambiguity of Zionism and the ambiguity of a nation state in order to maintain its movement. I saw in one of Peter Beinart's books, he quotes George Orwell. He says that George Orwell said, in order if a government wants to pass off on the population to get them on board with something that's really they'll never be on board with, they have to quote, it has to, the explanation that they give to the population has to consist largely of euphemism, question begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Now that's true. But in the case of Zionism, it goes one step further. Without the euphemism, without the sheer cloudy vagueness, Zionism would not survive. It only survives because people can't pin down exactly what it is. In order to explain this, we have to take a step back and do a little history of Zionism. A long time ago, let's take 400 years ago, the Jewish people identified as a religious community. It's that simple. The Jewish people believed that the definition of a Jew was, as the biblical story explains, the group of people that came out of Egypt. Moses led them out, and at Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus received the law from God. Anybody who received the law from God and is obligated to fulfill that law is a Jew. Now, if somebody doesn't believe in that story and he's an atheist, well, that doesn't mean he's not obligated to fulfill it. According to the Jewish religion, if you are obligated to fulfill this law, that makes you Jewish even if you don't believe that. So, for example, if you are an American citizen, you're obligated to fulfill the laws of America if you live in America. You may not believe you live in America. You may not believe that the laws even exist. Nonetheless, the American government believes that you're obligated to fulfill them. Ignorance of the law may or may not be an excuse for violating it, but that you're obligated to fulfill it, um, that's what the American government believes. By the same token, the Jewish law, the Torah, believes that certain people are obligated to fulfill the law of the Jews, and anybody who's obligated to fulfill it, whether they believe it or not, is called a Jew by virtue of that obligation. And that's the only thing that ever united the Jews. The Jews for thousands of years looked at themselves as united only by that factor. About 1,000 years ago, the famous Rabbi Saadia Gaon, an Egyptian Jew, he wrote a book, Emunos V'Deos, it's called in Hebrew. And in there, he wants to defend Judaism against claims by other religions. You know, they had these interreligious debates. And there was a religion that claimed that God took the law away from the Jews and gave it to another people. Rabbi Sadia wants to prove that that's not correct. It's wrong because he brings verses from the Bible that say that the Jewish people will endure forever. And he says, if the Jewish people are going to endure forever, that means they will have to possess the law forever. Because the only definition of the Jewish people, the only thing that makes the Jewish people, is their possession of the law, not necessarily the fulfillment of the law, but their possession of the law, their obligation to fulfill the law. In Hebrew, Ein umaisenu uma ela b'seirasa. Our ummah, our people, is only a people, is only an ummah because we have the Torah. There was no commonality amongst the Jews that caused them to be Jews. In the desert, when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, they became the Jewish people. That's the Jewish narrative. Hayoim hazen nihiyeh l'am. Today you have become a people, the Bible says, and our tradition tells us that that refers to the day we got the Torah. We went into the Holy Land and we had kingdoms, but the kingdoms were not what unified us into a people. That's not what gave birth to the people. The Torah was what caused us to be Jews. In King David, King Saul, King Solomon's kingdom, and the other kingdoms that we had under the other kings, we had a yes, we had a state and we had a king, but that statehood and the kingdom was not what made us into our people. With or without that kingdom, after we went into exile, in the book of Malachim Bey's 2 kings, when the 10 tribes went into exile, and later when the temple was destroyed and the rest of the nation went into exile, or after 2,000 years ago, when the second temple was destroyed and we went into exile, we were no less Jews than we were when we had a state because we had the Torah. So long as the Torah binds us, that being bound to the Torah, a covenant with God, that's what makes us Jews. And that's how Jews identified for thousands of years. Now, granted, as time went by, there were Jews who identified as Jews in other ways. The Enlightenment came, the Emancipation, and there were Jews who didn't want to be religious. These were assimilationists. They decided that they're not interested in the religion. They're not interested in this definition of Jew. In fact, they're not interested in being Jewish altogether. So they assimilated. They became Russians. They became Germans. Now, Jews were there in Germany, and they were German Jews, and they were Russian Jews. But these became Russian non-Jews and German non-Jews. And they figured as long as we have an opportunity, again, enlightenment and emancipation, let's join the non-Jewish communities. The problem was that it didn't work. There were anti-Semites who attacked these assimilated Jews, even though they were assimilated. They, for to a large extent, did not even identify as Jews. In Russia in 1881, there began a succession of uh, lethal pogroms which targeted the secular Jews, that's what we'll call them, as well as the religious Jews, which means that the non-Jewish world, because of anti-Semitism, would not allow them to assimilate. So now these secular Jews were stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they didn't want to be Jews. They didn't want to be Jews because they didn't like the way the Jews were. Not only did they not want to be religious, to a large extent, they had absorbed the anti-Semitic tropes of the Europeans around them. They looked at the Jews as weak. They looked at the Jews as ugly. They looked at the Jews as immoral. They just didn't want to be part of them. At the same time, the people who they did want to be part of, the non-Jewish Europeans, Russians, French, Germans, would not allow them to assimilate. So what are they to do? And there are various different answers to what they called the Jewish question. Uh, Communism was one possible answer. If you believe in communism, it's because it means everyone's treated equal, and they figured that the Jewish people will also be treated equal. There were various other movements as well. Zionism was one of the movements. And Zionism ended up the predominant one, if only because the Jews in Europe, where all those other movements sprang up, were decimated in the Holocaust, and Zionism was taking place for the most part in the Middle East, in Palestine. So they weren't subject to the Holocaust. Zionism said, you know what? Nationalism was in those days a very popular movement. People were becoming nation states, and whereas previously they were a person was a subject of a king. You were not so much an Englishman per se, but you were a subject of King Egbert. You would fight the king's wars, and you would be his subject. Nationalism, long story short, meant that now you're an Englishman. There were various different nationalist philosophies. There was liberal nationalism, like we have in the United States, which is kind of like a corporation. The nation is uh, has a social contract with each other. We all pay our taxes, and the people in New York and the people in California both pay federal taxes. And if California is attacked by some other country, the people in New York will run to defend them. There's some kind of unity. We vote and we elect representative officials, and that's a liberal nationalism. There's organic nationalism or ethnic nationalism, which is a philosophy that believes that there's something inherent, intrinsic, there's something organic about being, let's say, an Englishman, something exclusive that makes them inherently different, is if it's physically, spiritually, eh, eh, some type of, there is some type of inherent being English or being French. Was ethnic or organic nationalism, and a lot of different gradations in between. The Zionists figured that in order to normalize the Jews, in order to alleviate them of what they perceived in their absorbed anti-Semitic perception as the retrograde personalities and character traits of the Jews, we're going to transform them from perceiving themselves as a religious community to perceiving themselves as a national community. And that's going to change everything. It's going to change the Jewish aspirations. The Jews aspired in the past for religious accomplishments, scholarship, righteousness. Jews were pacifists. We we eschewed violence and wars, and our interpretation of what is called the Old Testament is that all the wars were fought in a godly way, and the Jews, in short, after the destruction of the temple, believed that their law tells them we can't fight wars anymore. We have no prophets. We have no Sanhedrin. We don't fight. We live amongst the nations, amongst the nationalities, peaceful citizens, not rebellious, not revolutionaries. And the Zionists, these people who became Zionists, looked at that as cowardice. Many pacifists are looked at as cowards. They wanted to change the Jews. You will change their aspirations from spiritual achievements to national achievements. We're going to make the Jews into people who consider success, instead of spiritual achievements, a strong army, gold medals in the Olympics, strong economy. Um, we'll win Eurovision song contests. We'll win Olympic gold medals. We'll invent apps. We'll invent Krav Maga. We will become an organic ethnicity, which was a very big ask for the Jews, because the Jews for thousands of years did not speak a common language. There were Jews in Ethiopia, Yemen, Morocco, Syria, France, Germany, Spain, Australia. There were Jews all over the world, and they shared no common culture, no common language, and no common land. So the Zionists sat down and they said, we're going to take these people and we're going to transform them. We're going to give them a language, a common language. And they sat down, mainly one man, his name was Eliezer ben Yehuda. He created a modern Hebrew language. The Hebrew language was not a speakable language. Even in the days of the Second Commonwealth, the Second Temple, the Jews did not speak Hebrew as the speaking language. They spoke Aramaic. The Zionists wanted the Jews to be united by things that nations are united with. So they created modern Hebrew. It wasn't a resurrection. It was a creation. Um, it's the modern Hebrew is it's almost I'm fluent in rabbinic Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, and modern Hebrew is very difficult for me to understand. But they created it and they insisted that Jews speak it. There's of course similarity, but still, um, the usages of the words they changed, and they did it on purpose because there were words in rabbinic Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, that uh, have religious connotations. They changed them to national connotations. For example, there's a word teku that Jews used, which connotes a rabbinic question, a legal question that we don't have a conclusion on. The Zionists changed the meaning of that word in modern Hebrew to mean a tie in a soccer game. There are many examples like that. In any case, they gave the Jews a flag. Jews never had a flag because we never looked at ourselves as a nation or even as a tribe. The Jews, as the book of Genesis describes, were made up of 12 tribes. Each tribe was a family, born out of the 12 children, 12 sons of Jacob. And each one of them had their own flag, had their own lifestyle slash culture. Um, but the Jews as a whole, we were not considered a tribe. There were 12 tribes. Each one had, we didn't have one flag that represents the Jews. Jews could be of any tribe. Jews could be of any nationality. Jews could be of any uh, country. There's only one thing that Jews had in common, again, and that's the Torah. That's it. But the Zionists wanted to change that, so they made a Jewish flag. They made a national anthem for the Jews. They made a language for the Jews. And all of these things they had even before Israel existed. And the final blow for this structure of the Jewish nation was to procure for the Jews a land. Now, there are various different options for lands. We know there was the Uganda program, which is Uganda slash Kenya. There were other different ideas, but the Zionists wanted very much to not to create a new people. They knew that creating a new people would not succeed. To be able to say, you know, we're not the Jews, we're a new people. We're the Canaanim. There was actually a group of pseudo-Zionists that did that. They said, we're not Jews, we're Canaanim, we're a new people. It fizzled out. It didn't get off the ground. Rather, what they wanted to do was to gaslight the Jews, was to take the Jewish symbols, was to take things that are valuable to the Jews and to tell the Jews that these items are valuable to us, but in a different way, rather than a spiritual way, in a national way. So, for example, Jews have a holy land, that's Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Um, it doesn't matter who has sovereignty over it, be it the Mamluks, the Turks, the Ottomans, the British, doesn't matter. Um, the Romans, the Holy Land was a land designed, it's considered closer to God than other places, just like certain times of the year are more holy, certain places are more holy. It was a holy land where righteous Jews went to serve God. It was a You can look at it as a giant organic synagogue, in a manner of speaking. The Zionists changed that to a national homeland. We never had a national homeland. Our national homeland was our Torah. What is a homeland? So in English, the word homeland doesn't tell you much about what a homeland is, but in other languages, it's more specific. So in French, there's la patria. In Russian, I forgot how to say it in Russian, Mother Russia. And in Hebrew, in Israel, they call the homelands Moledes, which means the place you were born, parent land, sort of. And in nationalist philosophy, there's some kind of organic connection between a land and the people, the nationality that was born in that land. And indeed, in Israel's Declaration of Independence, right at the beginning, it says, here the Jewish people were born. Which is not true according to Judaism. According to Judaism, the Jews were born on Mount Sinai, at the base of Mount Sinai, when God gave us the Torah, before we ever went into the Holy Land. Moses never went into the Holy Land. Obviously, he was Jewish. But the Zionists wanted to transform Jewish consciousness into a national consciousness. So here, this Holy Land became a national homeland. The holy language that we use for prayers and for studies became a national speaking language. The Jewish people, which are enjoined by the Bible to be Mamleches Kohanim v'Goy Kodosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy people. Jews are obligated to be holy, holy by getting closer to God, became not a holy people, but a national people. They wanted to change all our concepts. We always used to say next year in Jerusalem, that expressed a messianic yearning for the end-of-day prophecies to come true, where the wolf will lay down with the lamb, where lo yisa goyel goy cherev, lo yilmedu oid milchama, there will be no more wars. And ki li sichra kol berech tishava kol loshoin, as the prophecy says. God says that when the Messiah comes, everybody will recognize God. Everybody will serve God together. Everybody will live in peace with each other. It will be a completely spiritual renewal of the world. The Holy Land, Eretz Yisrael, will expand. Question amongst us scholars, but let's just say it will expand all over the world. The whole world will be the Holy Land. And a resurrected from the dead King David will be king on the throne, but we will be studying and learning Torah from God himself. He will be speaking to us the way he spoke to prophets, and the whole world will bend the knee to God. It'll be a spiritual world, heaven on earth, literally. The connection to God will be palpable. The Zionists changed that into, we were looking for political self-determination, which is absolutely untrue. And therefore, the definition of Zionism is, and I'm going to quote Israel's Supreme Court. The particular justice that said this was Uzi Vogelman. Getting back to the case. So these appellants said that we want an Israeli nationality. This is why Israel has no Israeli nationality, because according to Zionism, all Zionisms share the belief that the Jewish people are a nationality, not merely a religion, they're a nationality. And that's why there is no Israeli nationality, because the nationality is Jewish. And then add to that the 2018 nation state law that says that Israel is the country, not of the Israeli citizens. Israel is the country of the Jewish nationality. And we'll come back to that. This makes Israel different than all of the countries in the world. But for now, there is no Israeli nationality. And these 21 appellants, mostly Jews, judging by their name, Uzi Ornan, Uri Avneri, Itamar, Evan Zohar, Joseph Agassi, Yehudit Buber Agassi, Shlomet Aloni. There's a Ibrahim Dewiri, which sounds Arabic, but most of these are Jewish names. They said Israel is a normal country. It's a nationality. We want an Israeli nationality. We want people to be of not only Israeli citizenship, but Israeli nationality. Having the national nationality Jewish is discriminatory against those who are not Jewish. If you combine the fact that Jewish is a nationality and the 2018 nation state law that Israel is the country of the Jewish nationality, that means even if you're an Israeli citizen, you have no self-determination rights in Israel. So they sued Israel, and this was an appeals court, Supreme Court. Said Uzi Vogelman, by the way, they lost. They decided no Israeli nationality, the nationality is Jewish. And I quote, the appellants argue, for example, that it is impossible to define the whole of world's Jewry as belonging to the Jewish nation, which is true. For the Jews are all of the nationality of the states of which they are citizens, which is true. Says the Israel Supreme Court, says this Supreme Court justice, we are dealing with an issue that is sensitive and controversial on the moral level, don't ask me why, and the historical level, don't ask me why, one which has been accompanying the Jewish people for many years and the Zionist movement from its inception. And here's the money quote. The conception that Judaism is not only a religious affiliation, but also a national affiliation is the foundation stone of Zionism. Again, the conception that Judaism is not only a religious affiliation, but also a national affiliation is the foundation stone of Zionism. That is the foundation stone of Zionism, that the Jews are a nationality. And this was a revolution. It's not only Israel's Supreme Court that says this. I have over here a book called The Making of Modern Zionism by one of Israel's greatest political scientists, Shlomo Avineri. And he says in here as follows, and I quote, this book goes through the founding fathers of Zionism. Each one has his own chapter, and it discusses his ideology and his contribution to Zionism. One of the people here is Heinrich Gretz, the historian, even though he wasn't a Zionist in the classical sense, but he was the one that more than anybody else invented the idea that the Jews are a nationality. He created a history of the Jews, which started with Joshua. Moses isn't part of the history of the Jews. The revelation at Sinai is not part of the history of the Jews. The Jews' history starts when the Jews came into the Holy Land under Joshua. And he created an entire fictitious Jewish history that was the history not of a religious community, but of a civilization, of a nationality, what we would call it today. And says Shlomo Avineri, and I quote, the programmatic significance of Gretz's position is enormous and revolutionary. The Jews are a people, a nation, not just a community of faith. They have a history, and Jewish national history has a meaning within the structure of world history. Judaism, moreover, has a political content as well as its religious belief system, and the messianic dimension of Judaism has clear political connotations inextricably connected with Palestine. Gretz's main impact and legacy was his monumental history of the Jews. Many Jews who became deracinated from their religious and traditional backgrounds drew their historical self-awareness as Jews from Gretz's volumes. In other words, the identity of secular Jews. What is a secular Jew? Based on the definition I gave, a secular Jew is kind of a oxymoron, but no, the secular Jews created their own Jewish identity. To a large extent, it's based on Gretz. Biblical heroes who slumbered in Jewish self-consciousness for generations were revived and underwent a far-reaching process of emancipation, secularization, and romanticization. They took biblical characters, for example, Joshua, who according to Jewish tradition was a righteous rabbi. They made him into a warrior. Another author that discusses this is Chaim Breshit Zavner in a book called An Army Like No Other. And we'll get to that book in a moment. But in the meantime, they changed the understanding of the biblical characters. They changed the understanding of Jewish history. He's talking about Gretz, who did it in such a a robust fashion. Perhaps, continues Avineri, perhaps more than any other person, Gretz contributed to the view of Jews as a nation. Today, his historical method can quite rightly be criticized as inadequate and highly slanted. Yet it educated a whole class of modern, secularized Jews to view their own history in terms relevant to a modern, secular, and highly politicized world. What Zionism was a revolution in Jewish consciousness to transform the Jews from a spiritual people, from people who aspired to spiritual attainments and spiritual accomplishments, religious attainments, religious accomplishments, to a nationality. They took them out of the set of Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, let's say, and they put them into the set of Jews, Mexicans, Spanish, Russians. They gave them a whole new identity. Ben-Gurion commented on this, quote, "One could hardly find a revolution that goes deeper than what Zionism wants to do to the life of the Jew. It's a revolt against a tradition of many centuries." Jacob Klatskin, another great Zionist thinker, explains the goal of Zionism. Foreign ideas do not exclude anybody from the nation. A foreign language and a foreign country do exclude one. It used to be that foreign ideas, meaning ideas contrary to Judaism, the religion, would make a person a worse Jew. A good Jew is somebody that fulfills the Jewish religion. Well, just like a good musician is somebody that's good at playing music. A good Jew is somebody who's good at being Jewish. But they changed the definition of what it means to be Jewish so that now a good Jew doesn't mean somebody who fulfills the religion. A good at being Jewish doesn't mean somebody who fulfills the religion. It means somebody who speaks the language, somebody who's loyal to the country, etc. And therefore, when Israel was created, it was created differently than other countries. Other countries are the countries of their citizens. Uh, Mexico is the country of the Mexican citizens. It is designed for the Mexican citizens, and they have rights as Mexican citizens. America is made for the American citizens. Israel, by Israeli law, and this is what makes Israel different than all the countries. Israel, by Israeli law, is not the country of the Israeli citizens. Israel, by the 2018 nation-state law, is the country of the Jewish nationality, which means that you can be an Israeli citizen, but Israel is not your country in the sense that you do not have self-determination rights. And what that means is self-determination means the rights to govern yourself. So you as an individual, let's say you're not Jewish, let's say you're Christian, let's say you're Hindu. So you could be an Israeli citizen and you can have individual civil rights to whatever extent Israel gives them to you. And you could become, yes, a Supreme Court justice, as Israel always says. And you can have all these rights so long as you and your fellow non-Jews collectively are a minority. So long as you're not ruling over the Jews, you can do whatever you want. But you cannot have a majority. You cannot rule over the Jews. Only the Jewish nation has a right to self-determination to rule over itself in the state of Israel. Because just as, let's say in Turkey, for example, if you're not a Turkish citizen, you don't have as many rights as a Turkish citizen does because Turkey was made for its citizens. Israel, and here's the point, was not made to be a country of its citizens. It was made to be a country of the Jewish nation. Now, the Jewish nation, is not only the Jews in Israel, it's the Jews outside of Israel. This means that Israel claims to represent not only its own citizens and not only the Jews inside Israel, but Israel claims to represent the Jews outside of Israel all over the world. This is key to understanding Zionism. When Israel says it's the country of the Jews, it means two things. Thing number one, that Israel is not the country of the non-Jews that are Israeli citizens. And thing number two, that Israel is the country of the Jews that are not Israeli citizens. Now, what does that mean, Israel is the country of the Jews? Well, when Benjamin Netanyahu came to America to speak to our Congress to oppose Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal, before he left, he said that I come to America not only representing those people who voted for me, but representing all Jews all over the world. Naftali Bennett then, if my memory serves, he was Minister of Education, at that time later to become Prime Minister. After Obama, then at a different time, he insulted Netanyahu. He called him a coward, using a nasty slang phrase. Naftali Bennett said that if you insult Netanyahu, you're not only insulting him and not only the Israelis, you're insulting all the Jews all over the world, because Netanyahu is prime minister of the Jews. Israel claims to be the nation state of the Jews. Israel claims to be my nation state. If you want to know what a Jewish state means, let Israel itself define what a nation state means. In a 2014 article written by Avigdor Lieberman, posted on Israel's own website from the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Israel's own website explains what a Jewish state is. It says, a Jewish state is a matter of nationality primarily. What what France is to the French and Japan is to the Japanese, Israel is to the Jews. That's Zionism. Without Zionism, if Israel would be a normal country like all other countries, Japan would be to the Japanese, as France is to the French, as Israel is to the Israelis. Israel would represent the Israelis, all of its citizens. It's called one state, one equal rights state. But that's not what Israel is, because the state of Israel is driven by an ideology called Zionism. Zionism says, one, Jews are a nationality, not just a religious identity, as you saw, the Supreme Court, and two, Israel is the state of that nationality. Israel is not the state of the Israelis. Israel is the state of the Jews. That's its claim. Israel is to the Jews what France is to the French and Japan is to the Japanese. And this is not only the only time and place that Israel uses this equation. I have over here in front of me, let me reach for it, Benjamin Netanyahu's book called A Place Among the Nations. And we understand now what the phrase a place among the nations means. It means that the Jews are now a nation just like all the other nations, whereas previously they weren't. On page 88, Netanyahu explains why he believes anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Quote, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist, is the equivalent of, I'm not anti-American, I just think the United States shouldn't exist. Meaning, you cannot be pro a United States identity and against the existence of the United States. You cannot claim to be pro a French identity and against the existence of France. So too, you cannot claim to be pro a Jewish identity and against the existence of Israel. Now, all of this is based on Zionism. The idea that Israel represents the Jews, that Israel is the state of the Jews. This is actually legal status, not only legal. This is, as Israel's Supreme Court said, the foundation stone of Zionism. This is built into their basic law. This is not only the legal branch of Israel, the academics say so too. There is no disagreement about this. There's also no disagreement that this is the difference between Zionists and anti-Zionists. Israel's claim to be the state of the Jews is unilateral, offensive, oppressive to the Jews, and anti-Semitic. Because when Netanyahu, Avigdor Lieberman, Danny Ayalon said it also, it's all over the place. When they say that Israel is to the Jews what France is to the French, what that means is if you have two people in France, two French citizens, one is Jewish and one is not Jewish. France is to the French non-Jew what Israel is to the French Jew. That means the Jew is less French than the French non-Jew. Israel is my country, they claim, not the United States of America, especially since later on in this same Supreme Court ruling, it says that a person can only have one nationality. And if they would make a Israeli nationality, the Jewish Israelis would have to choose whether they want an Israeli nationality or a Jewish nationality. And if you can only have one nationality, and the Jews are a nationality, and Israel's the state of that nationality, then is my country America or is my country Israel? The truth is my country is the United States of America. My family's from Poland. I have nothing to do with Israel. Israel unilaterally claims, and this is what Zionism is, Israel unilaterally claims that it is the country of the Jews as opposed to the country of the Israelis. The truth of the matter is that Israel as a nationality does not exist. Israel is really a doing business name. Israel as a country really is, under the hood, under that alias of Israel, it claims to be the state of the Jews, not the state of the Israelis. Now, actually, on Israeli passports, it says nationality Israeli, because when they face the world, when somebody comes with an Israeli passport overseas, it will be weird for them to say nationality Jewish. They'll say, well, what does this mean? They don't want people to know outside of Israel about this claim. This claim is anti-Semitic. And it's not today that we decided this. When the Balfour Declaration was being discussed in England in 1917, so there was one Jewish member of the British cabinet. His name was Edwin Montagu. This Edwin Montagu was against the Balfour Declaration. He said that this Balfour Declaration will make the Jews foreigners in their own country. If you create a Jewish nation state, the Jews will be foreigners in their own country. And that's what Israel wants. Israel wants all the Jews all over the world to look at themselves, and they want the rest of the world to look at the Jews not as Americans, not as Frenchmen, not as Russians, but as members of the Jewish nationality whose state is Israel. And that's a lie. And that's the difference between Zionists and anti-Zionists. Very simple. And it's a difference of the definition of a Jew. And that's why the JPPI, the Jewish Public Policy Institute, took a survey. I have it in front of me. And they asked three different types of Israelis, three different types based upon religiosity. The secular, the Chilonim, the traditional Masorati Jews, and Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, people such as myself. Do you consider yourself Zionists? And here's the results. The nature of the differences between the Haredim and the non-religious can be seen in their differential responses to the question, does the term Zionist describe you accurately? Only 9% of Haredim answered that the term describes them very accurately, and 24% said it describes them somewhat accurately. That means total, somewhat Zionist, or more, 33%. And 9%, they're very accurately described as Zionist. Among Datiya, meaning religious people that are not Haredim, in contrast, 95% said the term describes them very or somewhat accurately. The difference reflects the fact that religious Zionists, in their own way, support Zionism as a transformative and redemptive project, while Haredim tend to reject it. Let me be clear. When people talk about the Jewish community, as far as Haredi Judaism is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, Zionism, the idea that the Jewish nationalism, the idea that there is more to Jewish identity than just the religion, the idea that Jewish identity includes either exclusively or also includes a national element is literally considered idol worship, absolute idol worship. And the to come to me, to come to the Haredim, and to tell the Haredim, okay, well, you're responsible for what the Zionists do because you're Jewish. Never mind, I'm only responsible for what I do. I have no say in what Israel does. I have no vote. They don't care what I say. But more than that, it's like going to the Pope or the Catholic Church and saying, you're responsible for the evangelicals who are Zionists. The Pope, Catholics will say, what are you talking about? We're not Protestants. We're not evangelicals. It's a different religion. And someone who doesn't know the difference is going to say, come on, you both believe in Christianity. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is Son of God. You believe in the New Testament. I don't know what little internal squabbles you have with each other, but you're all practicing religious Christians, right? And the Pope is going to say, no, we are Catholics. They are Protestants. I've heard from one side about the other that they're not real Christians or not good Christians or whatever. But they're two different religions. The difference between Orthodox Jews or non-Zionist Jews versus Zionist Jews, even the religious Orthodox Zionist Jews, is a greater distance than between the Catholics and the evangelicals. And please, don't say that I'm trying to wash my hands of the Zionists. We have washed their hands of them. We have washed our hands of them from the day they began. When Theodor Herzl created his first Zionist Congress, the rabbi said, stay away from him. This is idol worship. This is not Judaism. This is an attack on our identity. We have always said that. We have never had anything to do with them. Their politics had nothing to do with us, ever. I've been saying this for decades. And you know what? They say the same thing about us. Shimon Peres said, then president of Israel, he said that a Jew is not somebody who the rabbis say is a Jew, meaning that because a Jew means somebody who's part of this covenant with God, obviously the religion decides who has this covenant. If you're born, for example, of a Jewish mother, you have the covenant. If you're born of a Jewish father, not mother, you don't. You can convert, be born of neither a father or a mother that's Jewish, and you're part of the covenant, but the conversion has to be proper. There are all sorts of rules. The rabbis have no right to say who's a Jew. A Jew is somebody that lives in Israel, fights in the army, sends his children to fight in the army, and maybe even die in the army. And if the rabbis want to tell us who's a Jew, maybe we should start telling them who's a rabbi. I have an article in front of me. Sunday, June 8th, 2014, from Israel Hayom newspaper. Social Services Minister Meir Cohen irks ultra-Orthodox community by saying, quote, those who don't send their children to serve in military, meaning the Orthodox Jews, we don't go to the army, we refuse to go to their army. Those who don't send their children to serve in the military are not my brothers. He thinks he irks the Haredim. He doesn't irk me. Cohen's office issued a statement saying, those who incite against enlisting in the military and do not recognize a Zionist Jewish state are not the minister's brothers. Okay, I agree. I am not irked by that. I am very happy he said that. I am very happy that he, at least for one, does not claim to represent me. He understands that we're two different religions. We're two different, when he says Jew and I say Jew, they are just homonyms. One has nothing to do with the other. Give you another example. I have here a Jewish Orthodox magazine called Mishpacha, and they did surveys. The cover article is called, What Do They Think of Us? What do the non-religious think of the religious Jews? So, first, this is non-religious or traditional. How important is it to preserve the Jewish character of the state of Israel? Okay. 88.1% of the seculars said that it's either important or very important to preserve the Jewish character. And 97.8% of the traditional said the same thing. It is either important or very important to preserve the Jewish character. So you would think there's a connection between us and them. However, they also asked them, does the Haredi lifestyle help preserve the Jewish character of the state? Now, you may not like the Haredis' work ethic. You may not like the fact that they go to the army. You may not like the fact that they are anti-Zionist. You may not like the fact that they protest against Israel's government, but that they contribute to the Jewish character of the state. How could you argue with that, right? So 77% of the secular said that the Haredi lifestyle does not help preserve the Jewish character of the state. No, it does not. And 56.9% of the traditional said the same thing. So amongst the secular, 88.1% said they want Israel to have a Jewish character, but 77.1% of the same people said the Haredim do not even contribute to that Jewish character. So what kind of Jewish character are they talking about? Sure, they're talking about they'll have a Passover Seder, but that Passover Seder is a kind of like the July 4th, not July 4th, kind of like a commemoration of a mythological story where Jews were freed from slavery. To us, it's the yearly recurring of the holiness of that time that God brought us out of Egypt in order to go through the desert to Mount Sinai and accept the Torah. For us, it's a religious holiday. For them, it's a mythological national holiday. This way, the Zionists take artificial Jewish coloring and artificial Jewish flavoring. They take things that look Jewish and taste Jewish and smell Jewish, and they create a synthetic culture, an ideology that they call Jewish. But not only are they calling it Jewish, they're saying they are the authentic Jews. You know, it's like, so there was a Nordic religion, right? So the Vikings worshipped Odin and Thor and all those gods. It was a religion. Stan Lee made a comic book out of the religion, and he took the religion and he made his own version of it. Now, obviously, Stan Lee is not a good source. Marvel Comics is not, Thor is not a good source of the real values of the Nordic religion. And Jack Kirby and Stan Lee created a comic book out of it. The Zionists created a comic book version of Judaism. But what they did, step number 2, is that imagine them saying, you know, the people that really practice the Nordic religion, they don't even contribute to a Nordic character of Norway. Only Stan Lee and his comic characters do. The Zionists took over Judaism and they made it into something else, and now they're saying that they're the models of Jewishness and that the Jews are not. Anti-Zionism means that you do not believe that one of these two, the Jews are a nationality and Israel is a state. Listen to this. So now let's talk about the politics, okay? So Israel says, remember, Netanyahu said the reason why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is because you cannot say, I don't want Israel to exist, but I do want a Jewish, I do want a Jewish identity, right? So listen to what they did. Israel says that you're allowed to criticize Israel's policies. You just can't criticize Israel's right to exist, right? You can't say it shouldn't exist. No problem. Let's go with that. Let me criticize a policy. You know what the policy is? The policy I want to criticize is Israel's the state of the Jews, as opposed to the state of the Israelis. I want to criticize the policy that this Supreme Court ruled that there is only a Jewish nationality and not an Israeli nationality. I want to criticize that policy. I want to say there should be an Israeli nationality and not a Jewish nationality. Well, if you do that, then Israel doesn't exist. So that's what they say. Well, if you don't want Israel to be the state of the Jews, then Israel doesn't exist. And now you want to destroy Israel. So look what they did. They made a policy and they said the identity of the state is really that policy. Our identity is that policy. And you could criticize policies, but once you criticize that policy, you want to destroy Israel. Look what they did. They said, you can't criticize this policy. Not only can you not criticize Israel's existence, you can't criticize the entire country. Their existence is only a policy. It only exists on paper. You want to fight Zionism, then fight this. Very simple. Reverse this Supreme Court ruling. Reverse these laws, because Israel doesn't really exist as a nationality. Problem isn't that Israel shouldn't exist. The problem is it doesn't exist. It's only a DBA, a doing business name. Israel really, for all its laws, is the state of the Jews. It's a Jewish identity. And the truth of the matter is we want Israel to be Israel, a normal country. Problem is Israel doesn't exist as a nationality. All of these things, and the idea that there's one person, one vote, cannot happen in Israel because only Jews have a right to govern themselves. So therefore, they cannot annex millions of non-Jews. And the only reason that is the case is because Israel is the country of the Jews, and that's Zionism. And the only reason that's the case is because the Jews in their mind are a nationality, and Israel is their country. Now, even if the Jews would be a nationality, let's assume they would be. They're not. Let's assume. How did Israel become their country? Explain to me how Israel became my country. My family's from Poland. I was born in the United States of America. I pay taxes over here. I never lived in Israel. I don't plan on living in Israel. What in the world does Israel have to do with me? And I'll explain to you how they gaslight the Jews. But first, if you want to see another place where this is emphasized, I have in front of me the Hasbara Handbook. Promoting Israel on Campus, it's called, written by the World Union of Jewish Students, March 2002. Now, these people, as we all know, are in the business of teaching college kids how to promote Israel on campus. That's what it says, promoting Israel on campus, Hasbara Handbook. Page 1, all the way at the beginning, it discusses what the goal of Hasbara is. And it says, look, Israel's not perfect. We're not claiming Israel's perfect. Quote, Israel shouldn't have to present herself as without problems, just as no other country does. All around the world, governments are attempting to tackle racism, poverty, prejudice, and Israel is no different. Okay? First, I want to make a comment about that. It's true that in America, there's prejudice. And in America, there was inequality for Jews once upon a time, inequality for women, inequality for black people. They were dragged here in chains as slaves, and they were free. Then there was Jim Crow. There's no question that countries are not perfect. And yes, I've heard from Zionists that Israel's only 77 years old. They need to catch up with the other countries. Here's the difference, though. It all boils down to Zionism. Again, the Jews are a nationality and Israel is a state. And that's the reason why Israel is Israel, why it's run in a Zionist way as opposed to a regular country like America. And therefore, whereas it's true that in America, it was not always, and in many other countries, it is not every citizen has equal rights. However, in those countries, the more you give equal rights to citizens, the more that's considered progress, the better that country becomes. Yes, in country A or country B or North Korea or Russia, whatever it is, people aren't equal. Got it. Fine. But that problem could be solved. Uh, get a new leader, work on it. And the more you solve that problem, the better the country becomes. Who was a worse monster than Hitler? Nazi Germany was Nazi Germany. But when we got rid of the Nazis and we made people equal, we made people more equal, that Germany was still Germany and it was an improved version of Germany. All countries improve, they evolve, they progress, they get better as people obtain more equality. But in Israel, if you give everybody equality, you've destroyed Israel. If Israel would not be the country of the Jews, you've destroyed Israel. That's the difference. Get rid of Hitler, get rid of the Nazis, and you have a good Germany. But get rid of Israel's Zionist ideology, and there is no more Israel. That's the difference. You don't like the leader of North Korea, get rid of him. Maybe you find another leader, make a coup, and now you have a North Korea that's free. The United States, we were once British colonies, taxation without representation. We were free, now we're better. But if Israel gives everybody equal rights, it's not the Jewish state. And Israel's destroyed. The word destroy sounds so violent. But there was actually a Supreme Court case about this. The thing with Israel is it exists on paper. It's like, it's just an illusion. Israel should exist in the sense that let it be a nationality, let it be a regular country. How to do it if there's a security risk? Valid question. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Thomas Jefferson said not to free all the slaves because they're a security risk, and I don't blame him for saying that. They had real grievances. Nonetheless, they also had rights, and they're free. And that was the right thing to do. In fact, Jews were the first people in history, according to the Bible, to be subject to preemptive slavery and preemptive oppression because the government decided we're a security risk. In the beginning of the book of Exodus, Pharaoh says, the Jews are increasing, they're multiplying, we have to worry about them, they're foreigners. You know, Joseph came down to Egypt, and they're going to be on the side of our enemies, so we need to enslave them. The Jews were the first victims of this for 210 years of torturous slavery. And no, Judaism does not believe it's a good thing. But the goal needs to be the ideology of Zionism, the ideology that Jews are a nationality and Israel is its state. That has to go. I believe that the Jews are a religion. God gave Moses the Torah on Mount Sinai. That made us Jews. If you don't believe that, if you believe that being Jews are bagels and lox, if you believe that it's, I don't know what, social justice, whatever you believe, I don't understand it, but if you believe that, that doesn't make Israel your country. It doesn't make the Jews a nationality. The idea that Israel's the country of the Jews, meaning Israel's my country, that Israel increases anti-Semitism because it puts a target on me. Because statistics show the Cantor Center for Anti-Semitism Studies in Tel Aviv University repeatedly states that every year they put out a report on anti-Semitism whenever Israel does something controversial. So Jews all over the world suffer. Of course, Jews all over the world suffer. Just as when Japan bombs America, Americans are angry at Japanese. And when America bombs Afghanistan, the Afghanis are angry at Americans. When Israel bombs Gaza, the Gazans, or the people who are on Gazan's side, should be angry at Israelis. But they're angry at Jews because Israel's not the country of the Israelis. Israel claims to be the country of the Jews. Now, just because you're angry at somebody doesn't give you an excuse to harm anybody. If Japan bombs America, it's wrong to put Japanese in camps. It's wrong to beat up Japanese people. But there are bad actors out there, and there are people who beat up Chinese people in Chinatown because of a Chinese virus. COVID was called a Chinese virus here. And of course, they're criminals. But even a criminal would not beat up an Irish person because of a Chinese virus. So if you want to be an anti-Zionist, here's the way to do it. And in the Hasbara handbook, it explains. This same page in the Hasbara handbook says that they are going to teach people how to support Israel, how to defend Israel. Then it says as follows. The reluctance of Jewish students to get behind Israel unconditionally is probably connected to the gradual shift in our generation towards attempting to find personal meaning in Judaism. Meaning, this is what it says, that if you find personal meaning in Judaism, the more your Judaism is spiritual, is personal meaning. Now, for me, of course it's personal. It's my relationship with God. But even if it's somebody's relationship with, I don't know what, something else. If you have personal relationship with Judaism, if your religion is Judaism and your identity is Judaism, then your Zionism is weakened. Because Zionism is a substitute Jewish identity. Remember the JPPI survey? Zionism is a substitute Jewish identity. It's a removal of Jewishness, of Jewish identity, and the replacement of it with nationalism. It's the removal of Judaism and replacing it with nationalism. So here's how to fight Zionism. I know what I'm about to say is controversial. About half of the people are going to agree and half of the people are not going to agree if the group that is, if the viewers of this video are similar in demographics to the viewers of past videos. If you're unhappy with something Israel's doing, voice your opinion. If you're unhappy with something America's doing, voice your opinion. You could say that, nothing wrong. If you're unhappy with a policy of anybody's doing, voice your opinion. But here's the thing. Zionism means that there's a connection between Israel and the Jews. That Japan is to the Japanese what Israel is to the Jews. Without Zionism, Japan is to the Japanese what Israel is to the Israelis. So again, Zionism means that Israel's the country of the Jews. Anti-Zionism means Israel's the country of the Israelis. It's that simple. And if we want Zionism to disappear off the face of the earth, and I do, then Israel needs to become the country of the Israelis. And any communication, any in the direction that Israel's the country of the Jews, any encouragement of that attitude that Israel's the country of the Jews strengthens Zionism. So if a Jew gets up there and says, I am a Jew, and as a Jew, I have special standing to criticize Israel. You remember Jane Fonda? Jane Fonda, who criticized the United States in the Vietnam War, and I remember the Vietnam War, and most of the country was against it, and Jane Fonda was a particularly vocal activist against it. And she was effective because she was American. And Americans obviously have more of a standing. Their statements against the Vietnam War are more meaningful because they're Americans. And I, Jane Fonda, am against what my country is doing. And normally by default, a person has loyalty to his country, patriotism to his country. I'm not saying blindly. And that was her point. Her point is that my vested interest is my country. In fact, there were people, and then in the Vietnam War, saying their slogan was my country, right or wrong. She's saying, I'm not one of those people. Not only am I not one of those people, but it's my country, and I'm saying, no, the North Vietnamese are right. That's what she said. If Israelis want to be Jane Fonda's, Israelis have standing to do such a thing. Because the war is between Israel and Gaza. And if Israelis want to protest the war the way Jane Fonda protested the war here, they have the same standing in regard to that war that Jane Fonda did regarding the Vietnam War. But if you say, as a Jew, I'm going to be the Jane Fonda, I'm going to accomplish the Jane Fonda effect. So yes, I know a lot of people believe that it's more meaningful if Jews protest Israel's actions as Jews. Look, you're an American, your tax money goes there. You could express your opinion as a human being, as an American, whatever you want. But if you showcase, if you highlight your identity as a Jew in order to convey the message that even Jews support or oppose Israel's policies, then you're promoting Zionism as a side effect of what you're doing. In the short term, you are accomplishing what you want to accomplish, but at the bottom line, you're promoting Zionism, because what that means is that just as by default you would expect an American to support America, you would expect a Israeli to support Israel in the same way and only to the same degree. So too, you're saying I would expect Jews all over the world to support Israel because one reason, Israel's our country. But Israel's not my country. To me, the human rights issues in Gaza are the same. Now, I know somebody in the comments are going to say, no, he doesn't care about the Palestinians. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that my Italian neighbor, his responsibility and my responsibility to weigh in on what Israel is doing are the same. What's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Syria, what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims. My responsibility is the same. If somebody lays responsibility on me because I'm a Jew to weigh in on what Israel says, they're Zionists. What I do hold Jews have a responsibility to do is to explain that Israel's not the Jewish country. Now, the truth of the matter is that the reason why Jews that I know, at least the Orthodox Jews, don't do it is because we give the world a little credit that if a country, you can't, it's bigotry. It's bigotry to say that American Jews that have no vote in Israel, no say in the matter, they don't care what we have to say. We're not their brothers. You heard what they said? If we're not Zionists, they don't care. They consider us anti-Semites. Deborah Lipstadt was a guest of Peter Beinart on his podcast, and the question came up: are Satmar Hasidim who are anti-Zionist, are they anti-Semites? And she said, well, the jury is still a little bit out on that. Then she said, maybe they're an exception that proves the rule. What do you mean the jury's a little bit out on that? The reason why more Jews, at least in my circles, don't discuss Israel is because the same reason they don't discuss Russia. I'm not Israeli and I'm not Palestinian. Does that mean I have no heart? No, of course not. Does that mean when I see the pictures, I'm devastated? No, of course not. But since Zionism started, we've been saying that they're a different religion, they're a different country, they're a different ideology, they're a different identity. We consider them idol-worshipping Jews. I do have things in common with them, like the Catholics and evangelicals have things in common. I have things in common with Christians. Old Testament, God created the world, 10 Commandments. I have things in common with the Muslims. First cause, necessary, existent God. And have things in common with the Zionists. We eat kosher, we keep Shabbos. But I'm not washing my hand of responsibility. The way to fight Zionism is for everybody to recognize and to say and to emphasize Israel is the country of the Israelis, not the country of the Jews. Because if Israel is the country of the Jews, then it is not the country of the Palestinians, the Muslims, the Christians, the Druze, the Circassians. Is that what you want? Or do you want Israel to be one person, one vote, a democracy like the United States, like Canada, whatever? If you want B, then you must convey that Israel is not the country of the Jews. It's the country of the Israelis. It represents only its citizens. Granted, there are many Jews who are Zionists in America. That's true. And if somebody chooses to be a Zionist, then that's his choice. But there are many Christians that are Zionists. And there are more, from what I understand, Protestants in this country than there are Catholics. But you can't say because the majority of Christians in this country are Protestants, therefore the Pope is responsible, or the Catholic Church in America is responsible for the Protestants and the evangelicals. That's nonsense. The Jews are not a monolith. And every Jew is entitled, and you asked me, obligated to think for himself. We did not elect Zionists. Jews do not have a voice the way, let's say, Germany elected Hitler. They voted him in. And he was the representative of their country. Israel is not the representative of my country, and I did not vote anybody in Israel. No Jews outside it. In fact, 90% of the rabbis, the ultra-Orthodox rabbis, 99%, just recently prohibited any Orthodox Jew that listens to the religious leaders to vote in the World Zionist Organization elections. These are not Satmar Hasidim. They said it's a terrible sin to even sign that you belong to a Zionist organization, even if you don't mean it. To join a Zionist organization is a sin. And even if you do join the World Zionist Organization, you don't get a vote in Israeli political elections. It's not the same as, well, so many Jews are Zionists, so it's like there's a Republican position, even if you disagree with the Republican National Party. It's not the same. The Jews don't speak with one voice. There is no group called the Jews who vote and have a voice. A majority of Jews is like a majority of left-handed people or a majority of black-haired people. The majority of Jews are Democrats, by the way. Does that mean all Jews are responsible for what the Democrat Jews vote? If you vote Republican, you're responsible for the Democrats. And all of this is not to alleviate the Jews of responsibility for what Israel does. I'm saying that Jews never had any responsibility. Nobody has responsibility except for what they do. And Jews, if you're going to give Jews responsibility for what Israel does, that means you're claiming that Israel's the state of the Jews. And if you're claiming Israel's state of the Jews, that means it's not the state that means the Palestinians are not included. And the Christians are not included. And the Hindus are not included. Is that what you want? If Israel's my state, and it's not, that unilateral declaration that they have that it's my state, you want it to be my state? If you want Israel to be my state, it cannot be the state of the Israelis. It cannot be the state of its citizens. So yeah, the difference between Zionism and anti-Zionism is that Zionism says that Israel is to the Jews what Japan is to the Japanese. Anti-Zionism says Israel is to the Israelis what Japan is to the Japanese. I hope and pray for that day that this Supreme Court case will be turned around. Israel's nation-state law will be turned around. I'm anti-Zionist. A person can be against the Palestinians and anti-Zionist too. There are many people who believe here in the West that all Palestinians are barbarians and terrorists. Now, you can be an anti-Zionist and believe that, and the opposite is true too. You could be pro-Palestinian and a Zionist. Let's say, here's the difference. Let's say there would be a two-state solution, And let's say the Palestinians would get 90% of the land, and Israel would get 5% in the Negev desert. But that 5%, that state of Israel, would still have the same proportion, say 75% Jews and 25% non-Jews, and would have the same ideology that it does. Zionism would not change. It would still claim to be the nation state of the Jews. It would still claim the Jews are a nationality. The only difference is the Palestinians would be out of the crossfire. And I wish all the Palestinians health and safety. Absolutely. And all the Jews health and safety. I want this whole thing to end. And I want everybody to get peace and justice. But the way to do that is to get rid of Zionism, because so long as people believe that Israel is the country of the Jews, so long that people believe that unilateral claim that the Zionists make, then Israel cannot be the country of its citizens. So long as Israel is my country, then it's not the country of the Christians, not the country of the Muslims. And that's what needs to change. And I believe sincerely it can change without one casualty. Because the truth is, whereas Israel wants people to think that Israel is the organic expression of Jewish self-determination, and now the question is how to balance Jewish rights in connection to the land with the Palestinians' rights in connection to the land, that's not the case. Israel is the country of the Zionists. Me as a Jew, my connection to the land is spiritual. It's not one of sovereignty. It's a holy land, not a homeland. This is a political issue. It's not a religious issue. It's a political issue. And if somebody wants to make it a religious issue, the religion that it's an issue of is not Judaism. And if somebody wants to call it Judaism, as Ben Gurion said, Zionism is a revolution in Judaism, a revolution of 1,000 years of tradition. I only wish for peace and justice for everybody.